Dr. Sternglass knew the risk. A silent war, invisible twist. From the
hello everybody, welcome back.
He saw the truth in a poison
I'm Dana.
They laughed him off. They
You call into these live shows.
But the radiation never
Canada,
away.
United States, or Texas.
Dr. Sternglass, can you hear us now? We ignored the warning.
Always takes me a minute. It's my apologies. Being old and slow. Here we go. Almost there. Alrighty, so this is a show I put together for last night. And you're getting the show all ready and everything's going perfect. And then I wake up, it's 11:30. Like, holy shit. A bit tired than I thought it was going to be. Hope everybody's doing well. We got a poll. Let's bring that up, I suppose. Oh yeah, that's right. Should nuclear power be banned worldwide for covering up Fukushima's 4 nuclear meltdowns and 8 fuel pools with around 32 reactor cores total that melted down? I think it should go a lot more extreme than that, but there we go. We're almost there. And away we go. Let's get after it, I guess. I've been trying to use this format, which might seem like we always use, but actually this one I can zoom in. You can teach an old dog a new trick, apparently. And that cover song we played was from James Lucid's Connection on YouTube. That man's got an incredible amount of anti-nuclear music. I've never seen anything close to it. It's pretty special. TEPCO sent a press release announcing their plan to attempt to operate ELPS by September of 2013. Of course, the building wasn't even started. Well, it was started. I'll show you that the next story. In 2013, but the Riva system was the exact same system, which was the French system, was built, and they'd never even tried to run it because you can never get near it again. The existing water treatment facility can remove mainly cesium. So how can you remove mainly cesium when all the atoms are the same size? How does that actually work? In order to remove other radioactive material, achieve further reduction in radioactivity density of the treated water. You can't treat water. You're pouring water over a nuclear meltdown. This is what their claim is. And so it's picking up fuel particulates. And if you're not familiar with nuclear, what that means is multiple sieverts, probably 6-7 sieverts per liter. They emit to 2.2 sieverts of just beta per liter. And so by the time you get through 1,000 liters, you're talking about 2 to 10,000 sieverts. And 3 sieverts, like a liter and a half, just walking past it is a potential fatal dose. If you got a 5-gallon bucket of this stuff and you walk past it, that's a fatal dose. You will die within about 20 minutes. And so how are you going to filter something? The pipes need to be 6 feet thick. You can't change the filters. None of it makes any sense when you actually take the science into consideration. And when it comes to meltdowns, we definitely should take science into consideration. In order to remove other radioactive materials, blah, 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 we have to develop a multi-nuclide removal system. We are planning to commence actual operation in September 2013. But in 2013, in February, they had released to the press pool these photos. And this was the Alps decontamination system under construction in 2013. It's strictly show and tell. You can't filter the water. All right, so in February 2013, this was the Alps system. See all the hundreds and hundreds of people working? No, you don't. This is strictly just to manipulate you, get you to stop paying attention. So this is another picture where they claimed the common spent fuel pool. Now the common spent fuel pool, the original pictures that were taken by drones after the nuclear accident were completely redacted. It's at the same height as reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's right behind reactor 4. And so how can this be in perfect shape when the tsunami ran right through it? Once you stop the cooling, and look at the amount of fuel that got packed in there. Once you start fueling, or once you stop the circulation, these things will melt down within a few hours. They lost all power. And the fuel pools don't run on backup on the generators, and they don't run on batteries or anything like that. So they would have melted down. This was in front of the pump house in 2013. And so this is incredible stuff we're talking about. There's transport trucks piled up. This is 2013, but you're supposed to believe that the site, they had 7,000 people. This is on the seaside. And so if they couldn't clean up this 7,000 people in the first couple of years, how could they possibly accomplish anything else? So this is debris still tangled on the seafront 2013. So you have 4 meltdowns in a row. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Each of the buildings had 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. At least 8, if not more. One of them was a reactor 3. This was a plutonium mixed oxide reactor. And on the tanks now, of course, if you fill up a tank with multiple sieverts per liter, you can't build another tank on the site. So the fact that you have allegedly 1,000 tanks, we've counted them. The most we've ever counted was 750. That was being generous. And that was including, if you include the little tiny tanks, like these small tanks, when you count all of them and these here, for instance, you ended up with 750 tanks. And that's being very, very generous. So when you look at the site, I mean, this is reactor 1, reactor 2. The next one is reactor 3, and the first one is reactor 4. These were completely lost. And so there was so much radiation there, it was impossible for anybody, including the homeless and the destitute, which is who they had there. It was impossible for anybody to be able to work in that environment. And if you just have one of the reactors detonate, you can't go near the other ones. So Medusa, which is the plutonium mixed oxide reactor, they believe reactor 4, which was right alongside of it, if it went, you would evacuate. Now, but reactor 3, of course, was the plutonium mixed oxide reactor. It was a billion times worse. Let me play this.
My understanding is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
So he's pretending, along with all the media, that's just a fraction of them, that they're on top of a reactor 4 that doesn't even exist. So reactor 3 is here, reactor 4 is over there. You can't filter something when it's already gone. So if you drink water, and then your family member says, hang on, I want to filter that water first. And you says, well, I already drank it. And he said, no, that's okay. We're going to filter it, then you can drink it again. It doesn't, like, you're going to look at them like they got 6 or 7 heads on their shoulders, right? Because it doesn't match up. Let me give you another example just before we... So that was reactor 3 and 4. There's 4 of these reactors, and at the top of each of the buildings, 150 feet above those stumps, was 4 decades of reactor cores. And so, like, we've used their own footage. This is, you can go to their TEPCO website and download these pictures. That's reactor 3, that's reactor 4. But officially, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, none of this has happened. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency needs to be disappeared, just like the fuel pools are. Except for time of lethal doses. Checking buses for radiation. Look at the stupidest thing you ever saw. And you see what people are walking on? They're walking on steel plates. It's just stupid to suggest you can check a bus that way. Well, like, the first thing you're going to check on a bus is going to be the tires, not the windshield. And what's a bus doing at a nuclear meltdown? So they built these contraptions to cover up the reactor 3 and 4 and reactor 1. They're doing the same thing now with reactor 2. The stumps of them, the remains of them. And so this was built off-site and then it was assembled with cranes. And you see people that are walking around. You don't see 7,000 people. You see somebody with a tungsten vest on. So that would have been a homeless, in a paper suit. That's the homeless and destitute, or victims of society. And at one point, Japan has said, what are they doing? They're carrying chocks for tires, it looks like, at a nuclear meltdown. There's nothing you can do. Now, these would have been the homeless and destitute because academics are not going to look at the building and say, well, the reactor and the fuel pools are gone. I'm not going near that. In fact, you won't get them on the site. And as you see, I highlighted the pictures, the damage now that's reactor 4, but the enormity of reactor 4 on the other side of the building, because you're looking at one side, on the other side of the building, the guts are completely kicked out of the building. The only reason he left that facet there, that part of the building there, was to manipulate you. It should have been leveled right to the ground with the remote control cranes that they're using, see? Now officially, inside the building behind me, reactor 4, it looks like that. It can't look like that. Let's keep going with this story and these pictures. So to show you these pictures, they had built 1,000 tanks in the first couple of years. There was a lot of tanks. Were built with bolts, and so then they had to disassemble those tanks because they needed the room to weld up tanks, which means that the tanks weren't full of water. Clearly, there is no filtration system, and this is the stump of reactor 4. You can see all the guts hanging out on the other side. So when you look at the top of it, it's very deceptive, right? But the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings, not the bottom of the buildings. Right? The fuel pools are at the very top of the buildings. These are 19-story buildings, by the way. Yes. TEPCO chose not to stop the water leaks. Calling it leaks is the most dishonest thing conceivable. In 2011, over fears for their stock price. Of course, the government knew it because they were nationalized. The high cost of $1 billion USD would cause investment markets to consider the company bankrupt. Well, the company was bankrupt. It was nationalized, which meant the Japanese government took it over. Why was a company left in charge of a nuclear meltdown? Ask yourself that question. Because you don't blame the nuclear industry that way, you blame TEPCO, right? But the blame should be firmly blamed on the nuclear associations, the nuclear lobbying groups, the International Atomic Energy Agency, unclear. ERPA, the IPRC. What they've done to you is just absurd. Leaked it. And every time you hear the word leak, you should be ashamed that these people actually exist. There have been talks out of TEPCO and the government agencies involved that TEPCO should split into two companies. So one to handle the bad assets, the nuclear meltdowns, and the disaster, and another to run their still functioning divisions in their nuclear plant. Like, how can that even be conceivable? This would effectively allow TEPCO to walk away from the disaster with no repercussion. Well, there is no repercussions. In fact, every university and every media and every government agency in the nuclear industry on the planet has backed up this corrupt and diseased and deadly, lethal to everything replicating cells industry. Fukushima contaminated water problems worsen. TEPCO announced this week they wanted to begin pumping up water from the sub-drains. This is 2014, August 9th, near the reactor building. This comes as they were also admitting the effort to freeze the trench, so-called ice wall, was not going well. TEPCO's plan would include decontaminating the water before dumping it into the sea. TEPCO wasn't a decommission authority. It didn't know anything about it. And everything was gone in just the first 5-6 days. The entire inventories were lost. So you should have nothing but contempt for this industry and everybody in it. And everybody in it participated in the cover-up, unfortunately. And so therefore the entire industry is rotten to the core and doesn't deserve to exist for another second. They have no right to exist on this planet. The disaster site has struggled with water decontamination for years. Just announced recently they think they finally have the ELP system operational August the 9th. They certainly didn't get it operational per se, like finished, not operational, but finished the whole fake setup until 2015. The reactors normally need 4,500 tons each minute. It's like 4,500 one-ton pickup trucks driving past your house every single minute, 1,440 minutes a day. The sub-drain pumps might remove some groundwater, but could also draw highly contaminated water to the reactor buildings. All right. The lack of a clear understanding of where the corium for the 3 reactors is located. Well, there was 32 reactors at the top of the buildings. They're gone. They're gone into the environment. And they've now compromised the future of humanity and the species. And the effects upon the species are now immediate. Just bear with me. So we're talking about the tanks. I just did a little video there. I'll help articulate that, hopefully. If I can, well, I will, but if I can find it. There it not is. It's right here somewhere. Somewhere in my just absurd pile of documentation that I got. So it's absurd how much information I got. They can't win any debates with me whatsoever. They can't have a debate with me because that's the end of... So what they do is just attack me and insult me, ridicule me. Well, they don't even do that anymore. Alright, so I'm going to play this, get my big head out of the way. I'm going to play this video where they're going to, this was the BBC, and they're going to tell you all the tanks were full in 2013 from a joint aquifer underneath the site where they pumped up this absurd radioactive water and put it into the tanks. Now the problem with the story, of course, is if you fill up a single tank with that stuff, you can't get back on the site. But listen to what they got to say, because it's part of the equation.
Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We
understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So the water crisis, excuse me because I'm a bit stuffed up still. The water crisis has just begun, and TEPCO acknowledged in 2013, right? They acknowledged they have no control over the site or the water whatsoever. And in desperation, they filled up all the tanks with incredibly radioactive water from the aquifer. And of course, you know, the original footage, the original pictures, the original story, that's the story. You don't want to give them time to come up with a cover story. You want to cover the original material, right? Excuse me. Just give these things a bit of a shine. They're being hard to get along with. I use this soapy spray. Soapy spray. So the original footage, the original pictures, the original stories, which is what I'm bringing to you regularly. And we'll cover recent stories and then compare them to the original stories. And what you end up with is, clearly you're looking at the cover story. When they say they got filtration, it's absurd to suggest it, right? Let me get back to that as soon as I finish my shitty cleanup job here. So the reactors blew up. At the top of each of the buildings was 4 decades of reactor cores. It was around 8 reactors. That's backed up by science. And we don't have many opinions on this program. It's an educational program. We cover a lot of the nuclear industry stories. This happens to be the anniversary, which is, in context, this was on March. I don't even know what the date is today. March the 14th. So on March the 14th, 2011, reactors were still detonating. Now, the radioactive fallout covered the whole planet. There was an incredible amount of documentation of different isotopes. This was iodine-129, 220 million atoms. This was neptunium-239, iodine-131, xenon-133, cesium-137, covering the whole planet after just 15 days. And that study was the French government suggesting 1 million to 10 million times legacy fallout. So it could have been 30 million atoms of cesium-137 per cubic meter of air. There was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. And we launched emergency research expeditions for 6 years, for 4 to 5 months a year. As far as I know, I'm the only person, unfortunately, that had done that. And the reason we went back for 6 years, because after the first year that we discovered the species, now we're talking 4 to 5 months on the ocean without coming home. Grueling, brutal expeditions. This was brutal. Okay, let's get back down. Get them big chummies off my head. The word chummy, like where I grew up in an isolated place with no automobiles. And so you kind of got your own language for a lot of things. And chummy was meant to replace thing or quigamajig or whatchamacallit or whatever, right? You just call it a chummy. Instead of saying, give me that chummy or give me that quigamajig, you would say, show me that chummy. Show I that chummy. That's actually how you would say it. I just want to get the rest of the documentation out for this story, this part of the story. Because the story I was supposed to do last night was going to be called Fukushima's Alps system. There was multiple systems. There was the Alps system, the Arrivas system. I'm just going to cover a couple of them right now. They were going to build an ice wall. They were going to build a diversion wall from the back of the site. They were going to build a fence on the ocean side to stop the radiation from getting in the ocean. These were all just These were all like say you bought a car from a car dealership, a brand new car, and it had all kinds of problems, and they were trying to put you off all the time. And you would show up every couple of days, and you would say, "Well, you know, I need this fixed. This is broken." And like, okay, come back on Thursday, and we'll have so and so have a look for you. And you come back Thursday, you say, "Well, so and so is not here," and they do that every day for 14 years. It's kind of frustration you should have right now with this industry, except it's a lethal industry. TEPCO, April 21st, 2014, TEPCO can't bring the contaminated water issues under control. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ALPS, has yet to function reliably. Now remember, in 2013, it filled up all the tanks with incredibly radioactive water from deep under the site, from the big aquifer. It is still incredibly lethal, and it's contaminated. Radioactive fallout has contaminated every species, every human, every body of water. And the water is your most important and precious resource. What's more important than water? How can anything be more important than water? And this industry is attacking the water worldwide. August 12, 2014, TEPCO to abandon the Riva system, which was the French system, filtration system. For the last 3 years, the system was unused, kept out of operation. So they had the ALP system completely wasn't even working in 2015. Once it works, once you turn it on, you can't ever change the filter. So the problem with it is that, so if you take an oil filter off your car and hook it up to your tap, what do you think is going to happen? Like your tap water is not going to be fit to drink, right? It's the same thing with the ALPS filtration system. So you got 2.2 sieverts they acknowledge, beta only, because apparently neutrons and gammas and alphas don't exist, according to the crazies, even though it does. So you got 2.2 sieverts per liter going through a filtration system, right? And then when it comes out the other side, it's supposed to be clean. That's absurd anyway. But what happens is the filter is so radioactive after about 20 minutes or an hour. When you put 2.2 sieverts through the filter, when it comes out the other side, it's going to be 100 sieverts a liter. It's going to be like 50 times more radioactive than what you put in, because the filter is so radioactive. Because that's how science, there's actually science, and this is how science works. 2014, TEPCO says the groundwater bypass operation not having effects. Right, and so they had no filtration system, clearly. The ELF system didn't work, the Arriva system, the Siri system, the Curry system, none of these worked. because of the principles I explained to you earlier, right? The filter's so radioactive, the pipes are so radioactive, you can never get near them, you can't do anything. We call it science, see? They refuse to acknowledge science exists. TEPCO, which is, you're supposed to blame TEPCO, not the nuclear industry, or more importantly, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's what you should be blaming 100% for everything, because they're the architect of the cover-up. So they were going to build a bypass operation where water coming down the hill, the mountain, was going to be blocked and then pumped around the site and directly into the ocean so it didn't run through the site and increase the volume. Oh, they couldn't do it. They said it was going to cost $1 billion or something. They also admit the ice wall couldn't work and wouldn't work. And of course, we knew that. TEPCO failed to deliver on a promise to install a fence on the ocean side. So then they said they were going to build a wall on the back to stop the water from coming through the site and divert it into the ocean. And they were going to put another wall, which was the $1 billion I was alluding to. They were going to build a wall on the ocean side to stop it from flowing into the ocean. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. The site is built on shale, so they come in and they bring in all the shale and they bring the site up, who knows how far, like 100 feet or something. They level it off, right? And that all nuclear sites will do the same thing. And that way, if it melts down, you can pour all the water on. The water goes down through the shale. And shales are like big flat rocks, so to speak. And then on the bottom of all of these sites, they have a river, some kind of a river. Typically, right, like it's a significant river. And the idea is that if the reactor melts down, goes down and hits the bedrock, because an old river, of course, will wash away all the sediment and end up with a bedrock. The reactor will go down and land on the bedrock, and then the river will keep flooding over it and washing out into the ocean so that you can stay on the site to pretend that everything is normal. But underground, this stuff is being washed perpetually out into the ocean. Such a dirty industry. It should never have been able to exist. It only exists because of the idiot nuclear weapons that you can't use, right? The ice wall, of course, didn't work. Not only was it not meeting expectations, it had never been done before. They allegedly had 260,000 people working on the ice wall. And if you look at the budget, of course, that wasn't true. And on top of that, if you look at the budget, when you've done the mathematics, you divided 260,000 people into the budget that they acknowledged, then that paid everybody $1,140 if you don't build the ice wall or buy anything. So clearly, 260,000 people didn't work on that site. And where's all the paper suits to? Even though TEPCO in 2017 came out and said he burnt 7,000 paper suits every day because we badgered them. At that point, if I wasn't on the ocean doing research expeditions, we were doing shows 7 days a week. Let's keep going. 1,000 years from now, contaminated water. Well, calling this contaminated, this is lethal to everything with replicating cells. And you can't destroy it, you can't burn it, you can't incinerate it, and you can't dilute it. All you're going to do is spread it out and make it worse. If I take a 5-gallon bucket of used motor oil, it comes in your house, and I just walk around with a cup and I'm throwing oil everywhere, not on the floor only though, I'm throwing oil everywhere on the floor, downstairs, upstairs, in the basement. And then you come in after with a garden hose and try to wash all the oil away. You're just going to spread it to everything in the building, right? Radiation's kind of the same thing, except we're talking about radioactive. There's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against anthropogenic man-made radiation. What that means is every species on this planet will attack the radiation in their body with white blood cells for the rest of their lives. It's not like a cut where your body sends out a bunch of white blood cells, repairs the damage, and 5 or 6 days later your white blood cell count goes down, your red blood cell count comes back up. Because for every white blood cell you displace a red blood cell. And so after Fukushima, we expected to see a lot more road rage, particularly ear rage, because people would have less oxygen, for instance. We expect to see a lot more stupider accidents, and we expect to see a lot more schizophrenia and stuff like that because people have less oxygen. After eating food from the nuclear wasteland, pretty well everybody did, because you're talking about 14 billion pounds of rice alone that comes out of those 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for a decade because of radiation. Everybody understood in the industry, and so there was dissenting voices originally. That's important to remember. But what happened to them? Where did they go? So one day be considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world. George Monbiot, he came out on day 4 or something. What was it? Should be a date there. Well, I can't remember the date. And what did he say? Why Fukushima made me stop worrying and love the nuclear power. I chopped that off when I screen captured it. As a result of the disaster at Fukushima, I am no longer nuclear neutral. I now support the technology. So, like, that's a journalist for you. And we have many examples of the journalists pretending that everything was normal. I mean, this is just a fraction. That's ABC Australia, Cecilia Vega. But that's just a fraction of the media pretending that they were 150 feet above a building that don't exist. That should horrify you. Why Fukushima Daiichi won't be another Chernobyl. 17th of March. So that would be 3 days from now in 2011. So this story, the Fukushima anniversary should last about, we should be doing like a 2-week Fukushima anniversary dedication. This deserves more than a blip in the history, right? That's why this is why we exist, because of Fukushima. This is why we do these shows. And I've been a bit slack for the last couple of months. I'm not that healthy, right? And so I'm struggling to keep these shows going. And just because I didn't do one last night don't mean that spoiled my day too, right? Because all day now I fretted over not having another show. So tonight I have to come out and do a show. Otherwise I can't have a clean conscience. The Fukushima Daiichi runs a more powerful fuel than Chernobyl did, mostly enriched uranium. And that's an incredibly important facet to the story, because Chernobyl, even today they're still trying to claim Chernobyl is the world's worst nuclear disaster, which is absurd when you're talking about Fukushima. Lost 36 reactor cores, and each of the reactor cores were pure uranium, pure plutonium. Chernobyl was brutal, don't get me wrong. That was a graphite reactor, but it was nothing compared to uranium and plutonium. That's the 17th of March, by the way. Don't forget that part. There have been some small fires on the site. All were put out rapidly. So that's simply not true. And because this is the 17th, all the reactors had detonated by the 17th. And reactor 3, this explosion here, that was on TV. That journalist would have seen that. George Monbiot, well, not George Monbiot for that particular story. That story was Michael Marshall, who we've covered quite a bit over the years, perpetual lawyers, everybody in the industry. The entire planet should have nothing but contempt for everybody in the nuclear industry. Could Fukushima Daiichi catch fire like Chernobyl did? In one case, the Japanese authority initially said they wanted to spend fuel pools was itself on fire, but that was later retracted. At the time of Reactor 4, that was retracted. And it remains unclear what actually happened. Well, Reactor 3, they skip right past that, and they only talk about Reactor 4. Reactor 1 detonated, Reactor 3 had detonated. This is on the 17th, so you had Reactor 1 detonate, Reactor 2 detonated, Reactor 3 detonated, Reactor 4 detonated. And clearly Reactor 4 detonated. Pretend, just ignore these scumbags behind me. But that's the actual building. They're not 190 feet up in the air, okay? Because you got to be, where they're at the very top of the building looking down on the reactor. Let me try to give you some context. They're above the crane. Here, I'll bring you a picture of the crane. So they have to be above the crane to look down on that crane, right? So you see that gantry up there? That's where they're to. But they're not there, obviously, right? That clearly they're not there. And there's 70 of these identical reactors in the United States. They're not even in Japan. The biggest threat now seems to be the spent fuel ponds, where the water level has fallen and temperatures have risen. The buildings have already blown up. This was on the 14th. This was today, in 2011. Reactor 3 detonated. This could lead to the fuel rods breaking open. No. Well, see, there's a caveat to that, releasing their radioactive content. However, the company operating the Daiichi has said, which shouldn't be in the conversation at all, because they're not nuclear experts, they're just an operator, right? They have engineers running the plant. They don't build it. They don't have any idea, right? They just own it. Like, I don't build my car. I bought one, right? TEPCO's the same thing. The risk of recriticality is not zero. All right, so let me go back up. And there's a clip from the 16th of March, 2011. And let me play that. So this is Dr. Frank von Hippel. He's a professor. And he's going to tell you there's 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools at the top. Now, they're talking about reactor 4 in particular. But there's 4 reactors. They're all identical. So you can do the multiplications. Here we go.
And if, in terms of what we know about the capacity, about how many fuel rods would likely be inside that reactor, what sort of quantity are we talking about radioactivity?
I've heard different numbers ranging from 2 to 15 reactor cores worth. No, 2 to about 8 reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled, that's worst case scenario, 8 reactors worth of radioactivity.
Right. Right.
And it would be released into the atmosphere.
By the way, the fact that this has happened at unit number 4 is understandable and is consistent with the theory that it really did dry out, because the fuel from the unit number 4 was most recently discharged, and therefore was the hottest, and therefore the water would have boiled off more rapidly.
So reactor 4 had allegedly taken the fuel out of the reactor core and put it into the pool. That's what they're alluding to. So it's such an important clip. That's probably one of the most important clips we've ever had, because it explains to you what was at the top of the buildings. And so when you see them pretending they're at the top of a building, then you can appreciate why, because there's 8 reactor cores, plus the reactor core from the reactor is 9. But it could be a lot more than that. Remember, he said 2 to 15. That was like, so it's normal for these elite to do stuff like that, right? Where like they seem like they stutter or whatever, and because there's 6 reactors on that site, and a big chunk of fuel comes out every 14 months. Fukushima versus Chernobyl. Eliza Berkeley. Still not equal. So this was on April the 12th. This is 31 days later. So all the buildings have already blown up, and they're saying, no, I got nothing to do with it. I can't comprehend how somebody can lie like that. I really can't comprehend it. Some 370,000 terabecquerels of radioactive iodine and cesium. The biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel is actually curium isotopes, not iodine. Now, iodine and cesium are brutal, don't get me wrong. But for every iodine 131 that they're talking about, there's 10 times more 132 and 30 times more 133 and 31 times more iodine 129. The 132 to 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands of every species. And the 131 is brutally effective. So, but another caveat for this, 370 terabecquerels of radioactive. Let's forget about the isotopes for 1 second. 360,000 terabecquerels, which is a trillion. So 370,000 trillion isotopes. A single isotope can make an insect or a bird or a mammal, animal or a human or a whale or whatever start to grow a tumor, for instance. As your body attacks with white blood cells and builds a tumor around it. You can see the cancer clusters started in the early 70s after nuclear open testing, right? The radiation covered the whole planet. In fact, they done sex ratio studies on the entire population of the planet looking for discrepancies because everybody was contaminated, right? So they're looking for more males than females, which means less population of each species, because you can't just categorize this as humans. You have to remember the species are infinitely thousands of times more vulnerable than a human is. Now, the Point Lepreau nuclear power plants in Canada, for instance, the Candu reactor rather in New Brunswick, legally, because no one's holding accountable, is allowed to and does release 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year of tritium-3H. You can't contain it. All the Candu reactors are disgusting. But that one is particularly disgusting, particularly poor workmanship. It's always breaking down, thank goodness. But, and they spent enormous amounts of money. It's currently broken down again. It's been broken down many times. That's the best thing could happen to humanity. These things break down and not melt down, but break down. So it's a trillion. It's 300. So when you do the numbers, you ended up with 16 ounces. Or hang on. Yeah, 16 ounces. I can't remember. A terabecquerel equals 1 trillion. I know 1 trillion becquerels. Oh, right. So, just hang on a second. I'll explain that to you. Because the math is not that hard. Anybody can learn this stuff on top of that. The industry's not going to teach it to you because they can't exist if you understand it. I'll just bring up. It'll take me a second. Usually I can find this one pretty quick. Not all the time, but usually. I'm pretty sure I'll find it this time. Oh, I forgot to put the beak. Let me see if I get smart enough to look into it. No. Let me go back one more time. I'm stupid today. Maybe I'll get lucky this time. Here we go. This is rather important, actually, so let me do this. So cesium-1 or strontium, whatever. Okay, so look at it this way. Gram, a physical gram of, say, cesium or whatever. So Curie is 37 billion becquerels. I'll bring up the calculator for you, too, while we're here for something to do. So cesium got 88 Curies. And your calculators are not really meant to do these types of equations. So that means you got to come back to the other window. It'll take me a second. So you got 37 billion. Sometimes you can't. You look the wrong way, right? Oh, I screwed up. 337. Dana. If I look on my desktop here, it's easier for me to do it. But if I try to look at the screen, it'll look really bad. So 37 billion times 88. Right, there's 88 Curies. So each Curie has 37 billion atoms. This won't take very long. That's the wrong one. So 37 billion times 88. If don't ask me what happened that time. Clicking for something to do, which is 3.2 billion. That's a gram. That's what a gram has in it. 3.25 billion. Okay. 3.25 billion. So, I'll come back to the story. 3.25 billion. So the terabecquerels is a trillion. So 370,000. So let's do that one. So 370,000. 370,000 to 3. Yeah. My calculator won't do any harder than that. I'm just shy, right? So I'm 2 digits shy. Dude, we got the... Anyway, you can do the math yourself and to divide 370,000 trillion by 3.5 trillion. I got another way I can do it for you. Actually, yes, here we go. I'm a little bit simple tonight, so my apologies. 370,000. Let's divide that. And because we know that's a trillion, right? So 370,000, we'll call it trillion, divided by 3.56. 3.56. That's Curies, or that's grams. So we got 103,000, is that grams? 103,932 trillion Curies, rather. So we got to divide that by 88 to get the cesium. And that's grams. So divide that by 29 to get ounces. And divide that by 16 to get pounds. So 2.5 pounds. There was actually... I think I screwed that up too. There was actually around 6 million pounds at the top of each of the buildings. No, that's right. I got those numbers right. So there was actually 6 million pounds at the top of each of the buildings because there's 8 reactor cores and 1 for the reactor. They're all gone. And so when you talk about, by the way, when you talk about potassium and bananas and everything else, remember potassium is 0.100000071 curies per gram, 71 10 millionths of a curie per gram. So, like you can sleep in a football field of potassium, and it can't hurt you. And so then he claimed Fukushima released 1/10 the amount of radioactive material that escaped Chernobyl. But the problem is that Fukushima, each of the reactors at Fukushima, just each reactor core, and there's 9 reactor cores in the building, each reactor core, because it's pure uranium, pure plutonium, and reactor 3 was the plutonium mixed oxide, so it was infinitely worse. Each reactor core is at least 100 times Chernobyl's volume and plutonium-uranium ratios, for instance. Isotope ratio. So each of the buildings is equal to at least 900 Chernobyls. That's the best way to look at it. There's 4 buildings. So 3,600 Chernobyls. That's what Fukushima was equal to. And that's why we see an extinction event playing out worldwide. It started at the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain, the phytoplankton, the zooplankton and that. The microscopic animals, the eggs and larvae of all the species. The long-term health effects of the exposure remains unknown. Of course, we see that so much, eh? Isn't that so strange that we see that connotation? The long-term health effects of the exposure remains unknown. It's simply not true. They study every species after Chernobyl. If you go over to any of the journals, and there's 20,000, just Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley have 20,000 journals. But if you go over to Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, and put in Chernobyl, and then you'll look at it, it'll be like 180 million studies or something. They study everything, and the studies are every species worldwide on top of that, because it infests everything. It's the bubonic. It's a plague. The atomic plague is a real thing. And a professor is the first person to cut everybody's throat. How sad is that? Professor Francis Livens, research director at Dalton Nuclear Institute, Manchester, England. Anybody from England is going to be in the nuclear industry. It's going to be a pretty disgusting parasite. He said they have taken stock. He said technically Fukushima is a level 7, but he added in his opinion Fukushima was a low level 7, while Chernobyl was at the upper end of the scale. And this, what was the date on that story? Yeah, April 12th. That's a month later. So that's that person should lose their degree immediately and probably serve 20, 40 years in jail for compromising humanity and the species. Fukushima was a very, very serious incident, but Chernobyl was a catastrophe. So that story was dominant immediately. It was really heartbreaking to see the betrayal coming from all the educational institutions. This model is based on 23 days radioactive fallout from the French government of cesium-137 at 1 million to 10 million times background levels of cesium-137. And cesium-137 pulses energy 600 feet every second. And so they done that article, those statements were made a week after this model was already, the explosion, everybody's seen that on the 14th, which is today, by the way, right? 14 years later. It's the 14th anniversary of Medusa, Fukushima Reactor 3. We call it Medusa because if you get close enough you can see it. It's probably a lethal dose in the first 4 or 5 years. And the INES scale was formulated by scientists for the degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency, United Nations nuclear lapdog. They're literally the worst humans you'll ever come across is United Nations and the International Atomic Energy. They're truly the scum of the earth. They should all be in jail or on execution row waiting for their death sentences to be carried out. They're the worst. They look like humans, but it's hard to imagine they're actually humans. There really must be an alien species on this planet that looks like humans, because I don't think a human can do the evilness we see from the nuclear industry. In 1957, an explosion in a waste tank at the Kyston, Russia, was rated as a level 6. The waste, they had already had an event there, right? This is up in the Ural Mountains. Very secretive. Now, the Kyston was where they originally made the fuel for weapons for the former Soviet Union. And the Techa River runs right by it. And so they had prisoners would take it in actual wheelbarrows down to a cement wharf they had put there and were told to dump it directly into the Techa River. So back in those days, they ended up within a few years evacuating 7,400 communities, little tiny communities along that river, the Techa River. 3 Mile incident in Pennsylvania was classified as a Category 5. Wind scale was classified. Wind scale was a a full meltdown of a plutonium mixed oxide reactor that's still hemorrhaging since 1957, 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean. Not counting what's going airborne. Like the industry is so far out of control for so long that they have now compromised the future of humanity. Fukushima was the tipping point. In comparison, the Japanese government said the release from Chernobyl was 5.2 million terabecquerels. Well, you got all these multiple nuclear reactors meltdowns. And just one plant in Canada from New Brunswick to Point Le Pure releases 14,600,000 terabecquerels a year. 14,600,000 trillion atoms a year. And so they're saying Chernobyl or Fukushima was only 5.2 million terabecquerels after the first month. It's unforgivable that these people are allowed to exist. There really should be a very, very immediate and harsh penalty for anybody in the nuclear industry, and there will be in the future, I'm sure. Livens, the disgusting creature, said less radiation has been released, and there's a vague calculation of 5 to 10% of that released at Chernobyl. And this was the narrative that was very dominant, even today, certainly, but not as wicked or evil, right? They stopped saying those numbers. They'll just say Fukushima or Chernobyl's the world's worst nuclear accident. But that was pretty revolting that they would come out and do that, actually say that stuff. Japanese authorities were quick to distribute iodine tablets. They actually raised the limits 70 times higher than the crazies / the WHO standards were for iodide pills. Japan did. Raised it 70 times higher. There's a complete lie to suggest they were quick to distribute it. And again, this shows you, whoever wrote these stories are part of the International Atomic Energy Agency. They're very, very heavily, because you got to keep the cover story straight, so it has to come from one place. You can't have the cover story come from all these different directions. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency will write the stories, and they'll distribute it out to the media, and the media will get a kickback, and one of their journalists will put their name on it. That's how it works in the real world. U.S. government, which has shunned France's fuel reprocessing method not just because of proliferation concerns, but environmental concerns. And what France was doing at their Point La Hague, they had 3 of these reprocessing facilities originally, but the La Hague plant has 500 security guards, so nobody gets close enough with a Geiger counter or can take a picture. They released so much radioactivity that originally them and England, Sellafield, used to be Windscale back then, would take the emissions from the reprocessing because they're boiling the fuel rods in nitrous acid at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and that would liberate all the isotopes into that so-called bubble, and they would reclaim the uranium plutonium, but the rest of it they were pumping out and underground. They had to stop doing that because now it showed up in the water tables everywhere. So they didn't care anymore anyway, because once they had the meltdown in 1957 at Sellafield, or Windscale at that time, then they changed the name to Sellafield to cover up the crimes. So that was Jasko says environmental concerns. The water treatment process has been deplored by environmental groups like Scumbag, Greenpeace. Like, why ain't they doing the research that I done? They wouldn't even, and I contacted them over and over and over. We needed equipment. We just wanted them to share the pictures of Reactor 4, people pretending they were in it. The list is very long. They just blocked me worldwide. On every Twitter site belonging to Greenpeace, I've been blocked. Dumping these same waste into the sea in containers would violate the 1970 London Dumping Convention. I'm talking about the reprocessing facility. If you put it in containers, now before the 1970 Dumping Convention from London, who was the biggest proliferator of dumping in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that was the late 70s, they had dedicated freighters that were taking nuclear waste out to sea. The boats wouldn't stop and dump it in a single place. They would drive continuously along the continental shelf and make a turn back towards Windscale dumping barrels. And that's on the continental shelf, which is the nursery of the Atlantic Ocean. They've done that for 30 years. I can't comprehend the evilness of this industry because it purposely attacked the water, all water on this planet, and the air, and all food, of course. Every nuclear plant is surrounded by farms. All the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation. Areva treats the contaminated water from the reactor cooling system by injecting chemicals that bind to the radioactive isotopes and settle out. You can't treat contaminated water. It doesn't work that way. You can never change the filter. So now you made a big mess because now the filter is a liability. Areva said that the cleaned water could be recycled as coolant for the reactor core. That's a very, very, very important sentence right there because that's what Japan claimed they were doing when they had no filtration system whatsoever. That's why they weren't filling up the tanks quicker, they said, than they did. I played that video for you of 2013 where all the tanks, except for a few, were filled up with water from the aquifers deep under the site. Never had no tanks to store water in. Everything went straight into the ocean. Now, not only that, the tanks weren't filled. The reality of it was those tanks weren't filled. If you filled tanks up with all that radiation, then all the fuel particles will sink to the bottom. And so you got neutrons and betas and alphas and gammas. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to have a criticality in the bottom of the tank. That's what happened to Keystone, by the way, in the Soviet Union. And that's going to cause the tank to either explode or just to burn a hole in the floor of it because it doesn't need oxygen for the chain reaction to happen. And then everything runs out and you can't get back on the site. And so if you have an earthquake, and they had a lot of big earthquakes, they had 1,000 aftershocks or something. You couldn't take a chance and fill up tanks because everything was connected, which is even stupider. And at one point, a few years ago, they had a big earthquake where there was over 50 of the tanks shifted, which meant the tanks were empty. Like everything points towards the tanks being empty because you're talking about at 2.2 sieverts a liter. That's 1.4 million sieverts of just beta. So you can't build another tank on the site. You can't get back on the site if he does that. In France, the most common parallel process is evaporation. Wrap your mind around that statement. Contaminated water is heated, evaporated, and the contaminants become highly concentrated. It doesn't work that way. We're talking about physical atoms. You can put 2 million atoms on the head of a needle. You can't see it. So if you boil off water, you boil off all those anthropogenic man-made atoms, right? It's a disgusting industry. They got nowhere to store it in France, so they came out and claimed that they were concentrating it by boiling the water. They did the same thing, by the way, at 3 Mile Island, Arnie Gunnarsson and Lake Barrett, right? 1.6 million gallons of hideous water. The rest of it was already dumped into the Susquehanna River, right? Fukushima's partial meltdown. Partial meltdown, that's nice of them. Greenpeace. Increases fear of contaminated, like calling it a partial meltdown is absurd. Was there a date on that? It'll show up. Oh, that's Justin McCurry, man. What a crazy person. And Susanna Goldberg. They were two traitors to humanities, those two. So that was the 28th of March. Day 17. All the reactors and fuel pools have already detonated. Work to remove the contaminated water from the structure continues on Monday. There is nobody going near the reactors on the 28th of March. Like, because once Medusa blew up, and there's 4 of them blew up, right? But once Medusa blew up, that's the end of wandering around Fukushima for a very long time. So once that happened, like even if the other reactors didn't melt down and the fuel pools didn't all blow up, and if fuel pool was still intact on reactor 3, just reactor 3 melting down means you can't get near these buildings. So reactor 3 actually ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools right into the buildings. They fell right back down on the site. There's no one going back there. And so these people should be, there should be 2 million people down in front of the International Atomic Energy Agency every day with baseball bats looking for them. Airborne radiation had been confined to the reactor buildings. And it probably will be in the future now. Airborne radiation, because this story is not going to go away. Airborne radiation had been confined to the reactor buildings. Look at that, confined to the reactor buildings. That's the reactor building there, but that's a 19-story, 65-meter, 190-foot building. So how big is that explosion? It ejected the reactor core and the fuel pool right out of the building. You're talking about 9 reactor cores. One of them was running, ejected right out of the building. And this fuel, once it's exposed to air, by the way, immediately catches fire. That's why you see all that dust. You see all that dust, right? So the official story is they blew the roof off it. And so there's the roof up there. See the roof at the very top? How does a roof, a piece of steel, makes that big of a plume? Like when you look at the evidence, clearly the reactor core and the fuel pools were gone. Some of it remained, some of it got blown down into the building, but 97% of it was ejected right out of the building in that case there. And then suggests that it had been confined to the building. This is a desperate industry that controls your media, controls your university, controls your government. And has been doing it for so long, they control most of the key companies worldwide. And work to remove the contaminated water from the structures. No, nobody's working there at Fukushima, okay? Nobody. There's no one walking around. There's no academics there. There's no scientists. Even today, 14 years later, it's the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants, the victims of humanity, of the nuclear industry, while repairing the cooling system at number 3 reactor. This was on the 28th of March, day 17. They're repairing the cooling system on the reactor 3, Dana. See, they were able to count on all the universities. They were able to count on all the media, not to challenge their narrative. They were like, no one came out and challenged these assertions. There was dissenting voices, but they never challenged any of these assertions, right? These fake assertions. Yuki Amano, thank goodness he died. Director General International Atomic Energy Agency said the emergency can continue for weeks. So you had the head of the nuclear institution, the so-called nuclear watchdog, saying that the issues could continue for weeks. Yet, who do you think would have seen that originally? Well, these pictures were shown worldwide right away. So the head of the nuclear industry coming out telling you that it could continue for weeks or maybe a few months. How can you forgive them for doing that? U.S. authorities said on Sunday night the low concentrations radiation in Massachusetts rainwater were probably caused by Fukushima. Nevada, California, Hawaii, Colorado, Washington State reported tiny amounts. If this being dishonest was a crime, there wouldn't be a nuclear scientist that wasn't in jail anywhere on the entire planet. Just bear with me 1 second. I really get frustrated because it's so easy to disprove it. Any journalist could do it. So what we do basically is forensic investigative journalism, and we do the field studies too, right? 1 million atoms a square meter on the West Coast. That was one of the plume models based on 20 days. Like you're talking about on the ground. When you're talking about square meter, you're talking about on the ground. Which means all the species are going to be destroyed in increments over just a few years, and that's what we've seen, right? You got rain with 20 million particles. And so it's interesting to use iodine 131 for the particles, because normally the particles would have been curium or plutonium or uranium, right? The particles are created in the 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, where you're atomizing and aerosoling and ionizing and radiating physical properties like steel or rebar or cement or water or whatever, dirt, and you're ionizing and radiating it. You're atomizing, aerosoling it, so you're turning it into a fine mist that you can see, basically. But then you're also ionizing, radiating every one of these atoms. So you're creating more radiation than was originally there by doing that routine. That's still going on today. And that's one of the most frightening attributes of it. And then the iodine-131 is designed, and you'll always hear these connotations where, it's got an 8-day half-life, so don't worry about it. It's long gone. It was gone 14 years ago. So they'll say that to you. They're very careful what they say anymore, because we've been at this for a long time, and we will challenge them if we find them. Which is a labor of love, right, to come out and do the things we're doing. You got to love the planet to do what we're doing. Like nobody else has ever loved this planet and the species before. You really got to have that persuasion, that passion, that kind of drive. It's kind of ingrained into you. 40 million atoms. So when you see a Becquerel, a BQ, that's a pulse of energy. But where did the pulse of energy come from? It came from a physical atom. So don't play their game, right? Their grammar game. So 40 million atoms of iodine-131, but you can't just have 131, right? You know you got the xenon-133. But you see iodine-131 show up all the time. Wherever you found iodine, you're going to have the absurd amount of every other isotope. That's how it works. Is radiation Fukushima killing babies in Philadelphia? The West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129, which is a 31 ratio of iodine-131. So 15 million year half-life, there's 10 half-lives. It's pretty rare to see him actually say those words, there's 10 half-lives. They want you to think of only one half-life. And a half-life is very difficult even then for the average person. And they made it difficult on purpose, right? So 220 million atoms of iodine-129 is enough to saturate the thyroid glands of every species, every human on the planet. And so every species, every human on the planet is going to be producing radioactive hormones for the rest of their lives. And because you're talking about so much of one isotope, you can assume similar of curium, uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, and everything else. And what that means is all the species not only are producing radioactive hormones for the rest of your lives, which is going to, your whole body is dependent upon the hormones, and radioactive hormones are not how your body is designed, by the way. It's also going to be producing radioactive stem cells in your skeleton, right? So think about the developing species, the babies of all the species, and humans. They're dependent upon stem cells and hormones, and they're all going to be irradiated. So you can expect to see horrific health issues, and because of that attribute, then their immune system is compromised. So they're going to be much more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that would normally be completely innocuous and benign and harmless. And by the way, inhaling particles increases the exposure for all species by a factor of 1 trillion. It's in your body, it's pulsing energy every second, it's wrecking your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells, everything else. Your body tries to repair that every single second and attack the source. And so if you've got 1 million of them in you, your body has to attack every source and try to build a tumor around it. So you're going to end up with multiple tumors at some point, and one will get you before the other ones might show up, right? Radioactive xenon-133 in Washington with 450,000 times above detection levels. It doesn't, just because it persisted for weeks in xenon-133, that means all the other isotopes were persisting forever, right? The 129 is never going to go away. It'll be here long after all the trees and plants and everything else is gone, right? And not only that, you're going to sterilize and destroy all the water. Water is your friend, no matter if you realize it or not. Water is your best friend, right? Water is your nourishment. Water is your medicine. Water is your best friend, period. You have no better friend than water. Water loves you. It might be hard to accept what I'm saying to you, but water loves you. Water is here for you always, and the industry is attacking the water And then by proxy, you destroy all the species. Everything is dependent upon water. High concentrations of radiation hits the United States and Canada. The plume was rich in cesium-137. So, yeah, it is rich in curium. It's rich in plutonium. It's rich in americium. It's rich in like the plume, cesium-137. I already showed you that model, so I'm not gonna beat myself up over it. Or maybe I will. Who knows? I just wanted to put out a small show, and I didn't want to go crazy. So I'm probably going to wind down it a little tiny bit. Let me keep rolling in that case. Japan's nuclear worker evacuated after radiation levels soared. 27th of March. So they said on the 28 people were there working, but on the 27 everybody was evacuated. No, they were always evacuated. There was nothing you can do. If you go look at the original footage, and I have a 6 video series of pictures that were released by TEPCO. I got to do the whole system again, just to bring it to light again, right? And we got to take all the presentations of Harvard University, Yale University, Stanford University, Oxford University, MIT University, the Berkeley universities, for instance. Take their original presentations on Fukushima, which were 100% propaganda, and come back out and challenge each one of them. Maybe we'll start doing that this week. This Sunday. And the nuclear crisis raised fear about the safety of food. 150 miles to the south, Tokyo experienced a brief rise in radioactivity in tap water that prompted a one-day ban on consumption. What? Like, they had 29 million atoms per square meter in just one rainfall. That's never going to go away. The aquifer is completely compromised forever. So is all the water pipes. So is the laundry. So is the utensils in the house because he washed it with radioactive water. The list is very long. So how can you only have one day of radiation? It went away, did it? I mean, my goodness. They couldn't get rid of the sewage in Tokyo. They couldn't get rid of the sewage even today because it's too radioactive. They can't, and even if they dehydrate it, they can't get rid of it. It's too radioactive. They can't get rid of the ash from the incinerators because it's too radioactive. They can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration facilities because it's too radioactive. So to suggest that the water was only contaminated for a single day, like these people really should get the most severe penalty a human has ever had. And it should be immediate. Last week, the United States became the first country to ban the imports of milk and vegetables from some vegetables contaminated. Ultimately, it was 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima. And these prefectures are like provinces, say, for Canada. They're very big. And they each grow about 1 billion pounds of rice, amongst other foods. They never stopped growing food in the nuclear wasteland. They actually picked up 30 million one-ton bags in the nuclear wasteland. Most of the radioactivity found in number 2 reactor came from iodine-134, which has a half-life of 53 minutes, meaning it dissipates quickly. Can you imagine how evil you got to be to put that there? Can you imagine how simply, disgustingly evil? I thought iodine-134 had a half-life of 2 years. Let me check this out here. Because one thing you can count on nuclear industry is to be a scumbag. I probably got it there, but I'll never find it. It should be right there, though. I was using it just not very long ago, a few days back. Yeah, let me find that. It's starting to bug me out. What's going on there? I can't find that. Blub, 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 blub. I guess the problem is I got too much. I got too much here. How could I not have that right there? I don't know. It makes no sense to me because I was using it. Anyway, let's keep going. Let's get through this. So it's actually 2 years, not 53 minutes. Oh, that was a NISA spokesperson. I don't know why I can't find that. That's bugging me now. I got it there. I got so much in those particular bookmarks. I didn't prioritize it because I'm talking about my other computers. What I'm thinking. It's supposed to be right here too, though. Anyway, let's rock. Let's finish off the story and we'll call it a night. And he said the men were exposed to between 173 and 180 millisieverts, lower than the upper limits of 250 millisieverts per year introduced by the health ministry after the disaster. There's nowhere on the site you're not going to be getting close to a sievert. In front of reactor 1 was 1 million sieverts, which is 1,000 millisieverts. Yeah, they're professional scumbags that are a threat to humanity and the 8 million species and should be dealt with contempt. I mean, their contempt for you is just stunning. But that's where we're going to end the show right there. I see James got a new song up, or he's redone the other songs. What he got done, I'm pretty sure that he posted a preamble. He posted a preamble. I geeked out over his. Watch this. Where am I to here? Oh. I geeked out over his setup he got there. Because he's making all this music, right? And I don't know if he's been using it all along or that's a bunch of new equipment or... Pretty impressive, man. That's pretty impressive. I love stuff like that, eh? So let's come in, we'll get ready to close the poll down here. Oh. Yeah, I love the pillow. That pillow's excellent. Yeah, the Euro rack. Is that what you call it? Let me go back. Oh, you're going to send a donation? Thank you, James. My goodness. Is that what you call it, a Euro rack? I got to... Hi, everybody. I really got to start getting into the comments section more. The Euro rack. I love it. So, you got a few minutes. We're going to go play James' song. Then I'm going to come back and close down the poll. Should nuclear power be banned worldwide for covering up Fukushima's 4 reactors and the 8 fuel pools that melted down? I only got 19 votes, of course, because they always censor the daily system. But the truth is the truth. Doesn't matter how many thumbs up you get because the industry is going to censor you, right? The Euro rack. I love it, man. And that pillow is fantastic, eh? It's meant to bring up conversations if people are wondering why. It's perfect because people are like, well, what's that all about? And then that starts the conversation up, right? You can buy all kinds of stuff. I think now when I got T-shirts at my site, we're not selling anything, though. We sold like 300 of the Calm Down Charlie T-shirts, and then we didn't sell another one or two T-shirts since then. They literally just froze me out of everything. All right, so consequences of melted mocks. Okay, he put up a preamble of the song a few days ago. Now he's got a video for it. That's going to be awesome. I'm going to put my headphones on. I'm going to adjust the volume for you on my end. Just give me a second to set up myself, because I want to make sure the video is in 1080. So I'm going to turn down the volume on my end. I'm going to have to stop the video, reset it to make sure it's at 1080. See, it's at 360, right? This is very important I do what I'm doing right there. And I'll restart the video. I'll turn the audio on, and I'll adjust it. If it's too loud, don't worry. I'm going to be right all over it. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Thank you.
No reactors left to cool. Fuel sank deep.
Sweet.
Broke every rule. Pressure climbed. Containment failed. Corium heat. The warning trailed. Mux never meant to burn. Now the ocean takes its turn. Buried deep, but never gone. Half-life marches dragging on.
Lesions in organs, radiation climbs, snow crabs missing, Pacific decline.
Cesium binds to ocean clay. Cobalt sinks, but it won't stay. Plutonium dust in sediment lines. Tides resuspended over time. Bioaccumulates layer by layer. Shellfish no longer filters, consumers beware. Gamma shine in fish remains. The spectrum shifts but stays the same.
Marine life missing, no one knows. Radiation spreads, but no one knows.
Mass starvation along the coast. Fukushima crisis, no one's close. The ocean is silent, nothing alive. 3,000 miles, no signs of life. Melt